Good afternoon, everyone. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I now note that the hour has come. Andrew Goodman, will you please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen when you speak.
Vice Chairman Jones.
Present. Madam Chair, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. Okay, we'll come back. Councilmember Bass.
Good afternoon, I am present.
Good afternoon.
Councilmember Squilla.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and colleagues present.
Good afternoon.
Councilmember Brooks.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and colleagues. I'm present.
I apologize. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and colleagues.
Good afternoon, Councilmember. Thank you.
And Councilmember Driscoll.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I am present.
Thank you. A quorum of the committee has been established and this hearing is now called to order. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless regarding Bill number 221017 and Bill number 221018. Mr. Goodman, will you please read the title of the bills?
Yes, first Bill number 221017, amending Chapter 7-200 of the Philadelphia Code, entitled Preservation of Affordable Housing, to modify certain requirements that must be met before a change in ownership, other disposition, or other change in property interest occurs with respect to certain affordable housing properties in Philadelphia, and making technical changes, all under certain terms and conditions. Second is Bill number 221018, amending Chapter 7-200 of the Philadelphia Code, entitled Preservation of Affordable Housing, to provide for a city directory of affordable housing subsidies and their duration, all under certain terms and conditions.
Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for the questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to speak. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Before we begin, I have remarks about the legislation for the committee today. To convene this hearing that will focus on two bills that are a part of the People's Preservation Package, which I introduced in Council last December. Our discussion today will focus on bills 221017 and 221018. When combined, these bills do three things. Bill number 221017 expands the list of organizations that property owners must notify when they intend to sell their government contracted affordable housing properties. This bill also requires affordable housing property owners and other affordable housing providers or tenant organizations the first chance to bid on expiring affordable developments, as well as an opportunity to match a market rate offer for the sake of maintaining affordability before an affordable housing contract officially expires. Meanwhile, Bill number 221018 authorizes the city to directory of all government contracted affordable housing properties in Philadelphia. The directory will include each property's funding source and their contract expire. This will allow the city and its partners to better track our affordable housing landscape and proactively prepare to preserve as many affordable homes as possible. Members of this committee already know how urgent and catastrophic affordability opt-outs are, as we've held hearings on this topic in the past. Just last week, the city and I announced a settlement with a property owner that opted out of its affordability contract. I am incredibly proud of this settlement, which was possible because the UC Townhomes residents refused to be bulldozed by corporate interests. I'm grateful for their unwavering activism and determination, which gave me the strength I needed to negotiate with IBID and ultimately win. But this historic settlement is far from equitable because 70 families will still lose their homes. So that is why, if we take nothing else away from the UC Townhome saga, it is that the city must take a bolder and more proactive approach to affordable housing preservation. Well over 12,000 units of government-assisted affordable housing are at risk of expiring over the next 10 years. We all know the saying about how the most affordable home is the one that already exists, and that is so very true in this case. There's no version of reality where we build enough affordable housing to keep up with the amount we risk losing. That is why we must act now, because 12,000 homes is more than a statistic. It represents 12,000 Philadelphia families who deserve high quality housing in neighborhoods that provide walkable access to jobs, healthcare, education, transit, and public spaces. And at-risk buildings are more than just buildings. They are communities unto themselves, safe havens, opportunities to level the playing field and ensure our rapidly changing neighborhoods are still safe for the people who have been here for generations. And let me be crystal clear, an overwhelming proportion of residents who live in expiring affordable housing sites are Black. This is absolutely a racial justice issue, because we must decide if the city will once again let economic interests catapult Black families out of areas of opportunity or stand up for what is right. Today, you will hear from Philadelphians who endured opt-out and relocation. You will hear about the powerful economic forces at play that lead to affordability opt-outs, primarily occurring in neighborhoods with proximity to robust amenities and opportunity. You will hear about how former tenants of expired affordable housing properties are kicked to the curb with nowhere to live within their budget in their community. And you will hear about how affordability opt-outs are incredibly dehumanizing and in some cases even life-threatening. And I hope you will all remember that for each short story shared here today, there are thousands more like it, and tens of thousands more that will be written if we do not take steps to keep low-income residents safe. The People's Preservation Package is a result of expert testimony we've heard in this committee over the past few years, as well as additional research that staff conducted into how other cities successfully combat this issue. I consider these bills a good and worthy start to bolstering affordable housing preservation, though certainly not a solution by themselves. They are balanced, earnest steps in the right direction that will help us as a government be better prepared, give our affordable housing providers an opportunity to engage when sales do occur while not totally disrupting the market. We have a duty to ensure every Philadelphian, regardless of their socioeconomic status, has access to high quality, stable, affordable homes in neighborhoods all across the city. And with so much at stake, inaction is not an option. And with that, I'll open up for members of the committee. by Councilor Brooks and
Thank you. Can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you,
Hello.
Councilmember.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. The events at UC Townhomes over the past year are a clear illustration on why we need these bills. 8 months ago, I remember taking the pledge and standing with you with the families at UC Townhomes as they fought to keep their homes. And I am inspired by the historic victory that you guys won last week, because we know there are several other incidents that had happened throughout the city that went away in silence. We can be certain that there are more HUD contracts expiring soon, and that more families will be faced with life-altering news that will force them to leave their homes. What both of these bills promise in advance notice and time to prepare. They give families and advocates a fighting chance against gentrification, skyrocketing rents, and the displacement that destabilizes families and communities. A chance to prepare, a chance to organize, a chance to develop the kind of innovative solutions that Philly's housing crisis demands. Stable homes are the linchpin of stable families and stable communities. And when families' homes are in jeopardy, it means everything else is in jeopardy too. Your job, your children's education, the network of people and resources that help you sustain your family. And if you have never faced the threat of losing a home, you may not understand how devastating it can be. If you've never lost sleep at night worrying about where your family is going to live because rents are going up everywhere, and you can't stand the thought of tearing your children away from their neighborhood, their school, their community, then you might not recognize how important these bills could be. Housing instability causes tremendous stress and anxiety. It stretches families to the breaking point, and it contributes to some of our city's most pressing problems, from poor attendance in school to persistent gun violence. It's no coincidence that our neighborhoods with the least housing stability are our neighborhoods with the highest rates of gun violence. These bills represent two simple changes that we can make to increase stability and predictability for working families. They offer a chance to win more victories, like the settlement last week, which will create 100 units of permanently affordable housing and more opportunities for families to own their homes. And I'm grateful to you, Councilmember Gautier, for your continued leadership on this issue, and look forward to working for more innovative solutions for Philadelphia's housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those words, Councilmember, and for your partnership. I was told that my connection was a bit choppy. Can you hear me, Mr. Gittman?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
It is a little choppy. I think you recognize me for remarks. So until you cut me off, I will proceed. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you, Madam Chair, for this important proposed legislation, and thank Member Brooks for her passion on the issue. A lot of people think this is a somebody else problem. The fifth, the third, and the second councilmatic districts, but I want to testify to you today that it's a fourth councilmatic district issue as well. Penn Win is the first time it came across my wheelhouse to deal with. And there's nothing more sad than people that have to leave not knowing exactly where they're going to go, particularly senior citizens who are used to familiar surroundings. This is where I get my hair done. This is who I go play cards with on Fridays. This is my doctor's appointment route to get to their offices. And they know that, plan their lives around that. And to have that rug snatched from under them is not only stressful, but it can contribute to the longevity of literally their lives. places like Penn the Pavilion, and others are in close proximity to a lot of amenities. I think that's the common denominator. Pavilion is 2 blocks off of City Avenue, off of the expressway. Easy to get to downtown or King of Prussia. Penn, if you walk out the back door through their parking lot, is a train station that can get you downtown in minutes. So these properties that were once under HUD contract have become market rate targets. And we need to be conscious of them. It's not just in our districts, it's citywide, from the Northeast to South Philly. So thank you again, Member Gaudier, for bringing this up, and I look forward to the testimony. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair, and thank you also for your partnership and action on this issue. Am I coming through better now? Okay. Mr. Goodman, will you please call the first panel or witness we have to testify this afternoon?
Yes, our first panelists are Dina Schlossberg and Rachel Garland.
I guess that means I get to go first.
Yes, please state your
All right,
name for the record and proceed.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dina Schlossberg, and I thank you for this opportunity to testify today. I am the Executive Director of Regional Housing Legal Services, and I would like to thank Councilmember Gaudier and the co-sponsors to this bill, Councilmembers Brooks, Bass, Driscoll, Johnson, Vaughn, and Lozada, for their interest in housing affordability and housing preservation, and for the introduction of these very important bills. Just a little bit, 5 minutes or less, on regional housing. We are a very unique organization. We're a statewide, what we call ourselves as a statewide nonprofit law firm, but we're also a legal aid program and a sister organization to Community Legal Services and PLA. We have a very unique expertise in affordable, sustainable housing and related components, community and economic development, utility matters, and preservation of home ownership. For almost 50 years come next fall, we have helped deliver housing solutions to Pennsylvanians throughout the Commonwealth, including the development and preservation of over 10,000 affordable homes with our nonprofit partners. Regional housing has a strong commitment to racial justice at the core of our work. And in the framework, we provide innovative project and policy solutions that offer healthy, safe, and affordable homes in communities of choice where everyone can thrive. We provide legal representation to nonprofit organizations engaged in affordable housing development and preservation and equitable development, including dozens, if not hundreds, over the years of nonprofit and community development organizations involved in and committed to housing affordability in Philadelphia. We have a deep expertise in housing development, regulatory systems, and structures, and we understand the mechanics of affordable housing development and the myriad issues that encompass these systems. We do this work because we believe that housing is fundamental and that all people, regardless of amount or source of income, have the right to safe, affordable homes in neighborhoods of their choice. We also do this work because we recognize the racial and economic inequities embedded in the laws and policies of the American housing system and strive to find ways to address these inequities. Both Councilmember Brooks and Councilmember Gaudier have talked about the looming housing crisis here in Philadelphia, but it bears stating again. We are at a crisis point when it comes to affordable housing, and that was made even more clear and more present as a result of the changes that loomed during the pandemic. The need we have today and the need we'll have in the future is far greater than the supply. We cannot afford to simply build new housing as a way out of this crisis. The city needs a coordinated and comprehensive strategy to preserve our existing subsidized affordable rental housing. Almost 50% of our city's households spend at least 30% of their income on rent and housing expenses, making them cost burdened as defined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And the highest proportion of cost burdened renter households are located in parts of North and West Philadelphia. The need to preserve affordable subsidized rental housing is not unique to Philadelphia. We heard the comment that in the next 10 years or so, 12,000 units of subsidized rental housing are at risk. But nationally, it's estimated that over 325,000 publicly supported rental homes with existing affordability restrictions are at risk of expiration during the next 5 years, 325,000. This is a tsunami waiting to happen. And Pennsylvania as a state, let alone the city, is not immune. In Pennsylvania, it is estimated that as of the end of 2022, over 7,600 publicly supported rental homes with existing subsidies on them with affordability restrictions are also at risk of expiration. So we need this is an urgent issue, and we need to be addressed in a comprehensive, strategic manner. We need to do that here in the city. We need to be leaders in this at the state, and quite frankly, the entire country needs to kind of take this on. But as a municipality, which is what we're here to talk about today, we need to galvanize around strategies to preserve existing affordable subsidized housing. A considerable amount of the subsidized housing at risk in Philadelphia is in neighborhoods and parts of West Philly that are experiencing deep economic and demographic changes. This is a racial equity issue at its core. Residents who are lower income who live in historically Black gentrifying neighborhoods who are forced to relocate due to gentrification and displacement tend to move to poor, non-gentrifying neighborhoods within the city. This exacerbates racial segregation and inequality. This doesn't, this has been said many times, but indeed, the University City Townhomes is a classic example of what happens to residents residing in subsidized affordable housing in a resource-rich community when there is no comprehensive plan to address the looming termination of the affordability period, and the owner does not wish to continue the existing use of the property. I want to also say that I applaud Councilmember Goodyear for her tireless advocacy and the ability to reach some kind of a resolution with IBID. Andrew Frischhoff, who's going to talk about is here from LISC, and he's going to talk about the Preservation Network and regional housing. We were a founding member of the Philadelphia Preservation Network. Myself, along with Rachel Garland, who's going to testify next, lead the regulation subcommittee of the Preservation Network. So we endorse the testimony of our colleagues from LISC and from CLS, and of course from Vince O'Donnell, who is a national expert on all issues of preservation. One of the strategies that the Preservation Network seeks to employ is a regulatory framework to support and encourage the preservation of existing subsidized affordable housing. And we submit that the introduction of these two bills will help to expand the regulatory framework here in Philadelphia. In 2019, the Regulation Subcommittee of the Preservation Network promoted a regulatory scheme that would provide a coordinated approach to preserving existing subsidized affordable rental housing. This regulatory scheme required that owners of existing affordable subsidized rental housing provide notice of their intent to opt out of the regulatory framework. The goal of the notice is to provide the parties who receive the notice ample time and opportunity to locate a new proposed owner, what we call a right of first offer, who will then acquire the development with the promise of maintaining affordability into the future. If no such proposed owner comes forward, the existing owner is free to market the property, subject to the right for an affordable housing developer to match the purchase price of a market rate offer, should one then exist. This final mechanism is essential to create a path to preserve existing subsidized affordable housing here in Philadelphia. We are deeply appreciative of council for passage in 2019 of bill numbers 190860-A, which established the beginnings of a regulatory framework that would allow for an organized and structured response for owners of existing federally and state subsidized developments notice of intent to opt out of the regulatory framework. We applaud Councilmember Goodyear for the introduction of Bill number 221011700 and 221017001. No. 801, sorry, which amends, and the first one, 221011700, which amends section 7200 of the Philadelphia Code, which we've which is entitled Preservation of Affordable Housing. These proposed amendments will modify and strengthen requirements imposed on owners of subsidized rental properties before they may sell, dispose of, or make certain other changes to this housing. And this builds on the existing regulatory framework that Council passed into law in 2019. In particular, these proposed amendments will do some of the following. It will clarify that the regulatory framework seeks to preserve federal, state, and locally supported subsidized affordable rental housing, requires that owners of existing subsidized rental housing provide notice of intent to opt out no less than 12 months in advance of the time the owner intends to withdraw from the housing contract or to sell the property, and very importantly, expands the list of parties to whom the notice of this intent must be provided to ensure more parties can work together towards a solution to preserve the affordability on site, as well as to address the myriad of needs of the residents who reside in those homes. The bill also provides that no owner may enter into a binding agreement of sale for a property that's covered by this ordinance until notice of the salient terms of the sale are made public to a list of eligible parties, what's being called qualified organizations, companies, and tenant organizations that commit to maintaining the property as affordable housing and have the kind of financial capacity to carry out this activity. And that provides these parties an opportunity to match the terms of the sale. This, what some call right of first refusal, which we like to call matched agreement of sale, is critical to the overall structure to capture as many opportunities for preservation of existing subsidized rental housing as possible. This proposed regulatory framework is not novel or unique. A form of this regulatory framework has been adopted by many other municipal jurisdictions, including such places as Chicago, Illinois, Washington, D.C., Santa Cruz, California, and Denver, Colorado. In 2019, when the initial part of this regulatory framework passed, there was concern raised from private for-profit developers that they would be hampered by this requirement, this matched agreement of sale, and it would depress the market for these buildings. And we submit this is not the case, and that this regulatory framework that is expressed through these amendments to this bill allows an owner to be financially compensated pursuant to the terms originally proposed by a third-party buyer and that were originally acceptable to the owners of the building. In addition, we submit that eligible parties now have greater access to resources to exercise this matched agreement of sale through such funding sources as the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative and the new State Housing Opportunity Grant Program, which has set aside over $40 million for preservation. There are other sources that can be brought to the table, including increased fair dollars and other kinds of subsidized resources to enable an eligible party to quickly match the terms of the sale and, more importantly, preserve the existing affordable homes. I welcome the opportunity to discuss this regulatory framework with members of City Council as part of a comprehensive approach to addressing critically needed housing preservation in Philadelphia. I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony, and I welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, and thanks so much for your work in partnership. Rachel Garland, please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Garland, and I'm the managing attorney of the Housing Unit at Community Legal Services. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee in support of both of these bills. I wanted to talk a little bit about why it is that we see this as an issue. And so for me personally, it started a dozen years ago when I was a new attorney at Community Legal Services. And about 16 families showed up in our waiting room for intake one day. They'd all come in together from a property in Society Hill known as Washington Square East. Because they'd received a notice from their landlord that said that their subsidy was ending and they were all going to have to move out of their property. And they were deeply concerned because many of them had lived there for decades, if not generations. Many of them actually were a part of families that had originally fought for the housing to be built, and they were very tied to their neighborhood. They prayed at the church Mother Bethel across the street. They had gone to McCall School around the corner from their home, and many of them had grown up to then be employees of the school district at that specific school. And what I quickly learned is that we had learned about the issue too late. That even though HUD put in place certain requirements that allowed the owners of these subsidized housing properties to opt out of the contracts and required that they give notice to the tenants, The notice was virtually impossible for tenants to understand what it meant, and there was no opportunity for any level of advocacy or preservation. And the other thing that I learned out of this example is that had there been an opportunity, this owner very likely would have wanted to continue to have the property be preserved. They just didn't want to be landlords anymore, and they wanted to exit, and they thought this was the best thing to do in order to be able to sell the property. And as a result of this failure of notice and this failure of an opportunity to advocate around the property, these families were all displaced from their homes for the most part, and there is no longer this locality of subsidized housing in Society Hill, leaving Society Hill as possibly the whitest and the most affluent neighborhood that we have here in Philadelphia. And this was not a sole example. Again, in 2017, the owners of another subsidized housing building, Overmont House, chose not to renew their subsidy contract. And again, the residents of that property had to relocate. So at that point, the Community Legal Services began working with Temple Law School's Scheller Center for Social Justice. And the result of that was a report called The Danger of the Opt-out. And what the students at the Scheller Center did in consultation with their professor and with us is they looked at a number of factors that would likely influence an owner to opt out, to end the subsidy contract, so that we as a city and a community could begin to anticipate where these opt-outs might happen and begin to think through what preservation strategies could exist to preserve these. And it's important to note that Section 8 project-based housing, so the main type of property that we're considering here, though there are some other types as well, began in the 1960s. And it began as a way for the federal government to finance mortgages and provide subsidy contracts to providers of affordable housing. And what makes project-based housing unique is that the subsidy is tied to a particular building or a particular set of buildings in one neighborhood. And so for generations, as tenants move in or out of the property itself continues to act as a source of affordable housing in that particular neighborhood. And the issue is that these project-based properties, because they're privately owned, when the subsidy contract ends, it is the owner's choice whether or not to renew the subsidy contract. And there's nothing really that can necessarily be done to change that. So that when the owner opts out, the units can be turned into private market rate apartments. They can be used for commercial use, or they can be sold or demolished. And there are often significant economic incentives for owners to opt out and then eliminate these affordable housing units, which are very often in gentrifying neighborhoods. Once an owner has opted out, this source of affordable housing ends and it cannot be reinstated. There is no new sources of funding to fund these contracts in the way that there was back in the 1960s, because Congress stopped allocating this type of funding over 40 years ago. The Danger of the Opt-out report looked at all of Philadelphia's project-based properties using these risk factors. And of the 44 properties that were owned by for-profit companies, who therefore had an increased incentive to opt out of the Section 8 contracts, 18 of them were in gentrifying census tracts. 24 of them had inspection scores through HUD of 89 or lower, putting them at an increased risk of opt-out to avoid negative consequences with HUD. And at least 16 of the properties met 2 out of these 3 risk factors. This opt-out report is still very relevant today, and it still provides us with a possible roadmap to looking at which properties and what factors we might want to consider. Like many components of affordable housing, this risk of opt-outs disproportionately affects Philadelphians who are low-income and Black. Philadelphia is currently going through the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing process, as it did before in 2016. And the resulting assessment of fair housing document at that time found that African American tenants lived in project-based housing in disproportionately large numbers, 65% of residents compared with 44% of the city's population. Data also showed that African American tenants in Philadelphia were also disproportionately likely to carry a severe housing cost burden, a HUD measure based on residents paying 50% or more of their income to housing costs. So the loss of any affordable housing, and particularly the loss of Section 8 project-based housing, is hardest felt by Black and brown populations already facing severe housing challenges. Not only are these tenants forced to move out of the home they have lived in for years and often decades, they most often can no longer remain in their neighborhoods. and will struggle to find replacement housing in other far less economically advantageous areas of the city. The preservation of Section 8 project-based housing and other types of affordable housing is a critical racial equity issue in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, Philadelphia is continuing to see owners choosing to opt out of these project-based subsidies, as people have mentioned, most recently with University City Townhomes in West Philadelphia, which is home to 73 households. Because of these instances, in 2019, we began working with the Philadelphia's Preservation Network and City Council to introduce a notice requirement that would provide advance notice beyond the minimal notice required by HUD. Thanks to that legislation, the owner's decision to opt out of their project-based contract was public information, and the residents, City Council, and advocates could work to advocate for preservation. And this is exactly what happened in University City Townhomes. However, as we saw with University City Townhomes, the notice requirement alone was insufficient to ensure for full preservation of the property. Without a right of first refusal, similar to what is being proposed in the legislation today, and meaningful supports to enable a prospective buyer to step in with funding to purchase these properties when the owners want to end the subsidy or sell the property, Philadelphia is going to continue to lose affordable housing resources that are tied to particular neighborhoods. Community Legal Services is committed to continuing to work with the Philadelphia's Preservation Network, the city, City Council, and many of you here today to explore and advocate for preservation initiatives, which are being discussed today. A critical component of the preservation efforts must be the inclusion of the residents in the preservation process, and if they are interested in the ultimate disposition of the property, so that their interests and the interests of others similarly situated tenants can be the driving force. I think that the bills proposed here today will achieve that. I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee in support of this important issue. Thank you, Councilmember Gauthier. Thank you to the rest of the committee for your work on this legislation and your dedication to exploring the effects of opt-outs and possible paths to preservation of affordable housing.
Thank you so much for your testimony and moreover for your work and your partnership. I have questions for both of you, and I see Vice Chair Jones has questions next. First, for both of you, words can't express how grateful and indebted we are in this office for the support that CLS and RHLS provide to residents who are experiencing this type of housing insecurity. And to nonprofit housing providers across the city who are working to do the right thing. From all of your collective work on this topic of opt-outs, where do the interventions proposed in these bills rank for you in terms of degree of importance?
Is the question which interventions, or is the question
in terms of the multiple things that the bill does?
Oh, I see.
How would you rank them in terms of priority?
They kind of build on themselves, like I mean, if you had a right of first refusal and only a right of first refusal or matched agreement of sale, we don't like to use right of first refusal if we can, it wouldn't be as effective without having all of the notice requirements and the obligations for there to bring together a team of folks who are interested in the affordability preservation. So I do think that the opportunity for a matched agreement of sale is really critical. I also think that it is really critical to have the notice go to more parties so that at a time when more parties can engage as a team to try to find a new buyer. I also think, well, it's not covered in the bill, but it is essential. And I want to make sure that people understand that there has to be resources available, not just from the city, but there have to be resources available from other agencies as well, which is why this is a statewide issue as well as a city issue, to make funds available so that when there are willing buyers, as Rachel talked about in the Washington Square East, there might have been a willing buyer, but you just need to know who they are. So I also think that probably in ranking of some of the area of priority, I really appreciate that this bill would try to develop both data. I guess that would be the second bill, but it would have more comprehensive capturing of data, but in the first bill the amending of 2 dash what is it called? Yeah, the first bill 221017. Yeah, that one would also would allow for there to be a standardization or a collective identification of eligible parties, so that when there's an opportunity, like it just becomes more efficient, that we know somebody's getting to the point of wanting to opt out of a building, or opt out of it. They want to sell their building, they want to opt out of a contract. We have ready-made buyers available, and they've already been screened and they've already been identified by the city and by the community as having the capacity and the desire and interest. So I think you need the eligible parties, and you need the matched agreement of sale. And I really appreciate that in this revised and these amendments, there's also really a recognition of the opportunity for tenant organizations to have a voice and an opportunity to purchase. So I think I probably gave you a lawyer answer, which is kind of like not an answer, but just to reinforce that these are all really important parts of the bill.
That was really helpful. Thank you. Ms. Garland, do you have anything to add?
No, just to reiterate that I think we learned in 2019 what happens when you only pass one piece of the puzzle is that one piece of the puzzle, you just get a little piece of a puzzle. And if we really want is we want the whole system to work and we want the whole puzzle, we got to pass all the pieces.
Yeah, thank you so much. My next question is about what difference it could have made to have these interventions in place at the time of other opt-outs. Ms. Garland, you talked pretty extensively about how this bill might have been useful in the Society Hill and even in the townhomes example, but Ms. Schlossberg, can you add anything about how this might have helped in other opt-out situations?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that there are some smaller opt-outs. I can think of a couple in West Philly by some of the for-profit developers. I can think of, quite frankly, of one that was in West Philly that was a nonprofit that made the calculated decision. I'm not judging, just saying they made the calculated decision to sell a building that was in the, a very well-recognized school. It was in the university schools, Penn University catchment. Had we had and there were multiple families living there, some with disabilities, some with children, who specifically selected that building because it was so close to the school and they wanted their child in that really highly ranked elementary school. So having this, if this framework had been in place, the opportunities to have a different outcome are just, we don't know what the past would have brought, but we know that we at least would have had an opportunity to look for a successful purchaser. And I will say that in other jurisdictions where this kind of framework is established, it quickly becomes the norm. And I believe that probably Vince O'Donnell may talk about it. It becomes the norm, and people don't fight back. They recognize this is how it works. They don't file constitutional challenges. They say, okay, this is how it works. And you know what? I'm going to get paid we're not asking for somebody not to get paid a fair market value for their real estate. We're saying, let somebody acquire it so that the people who reside there and the community can maintain and continue to have this very vital resource in their community. I could think of one project that both CLS and Regional Housing have participated in that was also in a different part of Center City, and a different set of facts. Okay. But had there been this structure in place, it is possible that the residents who resided there would have been able to utilize the resources of this kind of structure to perhaps acquire the building themselves. So, it just opens up opportunity and it stops the bleed. And it creates a different kind of discussion and conversation.
Thank you. And Ms. Schlossberg, can you expound on how many other urban areas like ours have this type of legislation in place?
Yep, there is a couple. I mean, urban areas like ours, there's probably, I know that Boston has it's a system, that Chicago has a system like this. Washington, D.C. has a system like this. I mean, they're variations on the theme, but there are systems where they've tried to create these structured regulatory frameworks for opt-outs. So Washington, D.C., Chicago, Boston, I mean, there's some smaller jurisdictions in California. I want to say parts of a city in Colorado, but I'd have to confirm, other than like a small one. There's some in California, but I don't think they're like, what you might describe as urban in the same way. But Boston, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. are three that have been successful. And again, there's no constitutional challenges, and they are able to preserve almost all of the, I think Chicago, I know that they have preserved almost everything, and the same with Boston.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I'll move to Vice Chair Jones for questions.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for this informative testimony that covers, once again, my district. How big is this problem? How do we get a sense of scope as to how many properties, how many people are impacted by these expirations of affordable housing?
Coming up, going forward, or in the past?
Going forward.
Well, the Preservation Network has some really, really good data. There are multiple places where you can get preservation data. One is the Preservation Data Bank. Like, there's the Preservation Data that's federal. That's run through the National Housing Preservation Database. I know the Preservation Network has done a lot of research. I know the City of Philadelphia has done a lot of research, and I believe the number is somewhere in the 10 to 12 to 14,000 unit range, depending on whether you're looking at 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and whether you're looking at just federally subsidized or whether you're also looking at the low-income housing tax credit system and those buildings that are coming to the end of the 30-year cycle of compliance. So the problem's pretty big. Like I said, statewide, it's over 7,600 units, and nationally, it's over 325,000. You're in good company, but bad company, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Does it make sense, and I offer this to you as well, Madam Chair, that we petition the state to come up with a pool of money that might be applied to the financial assistance end of this legislation? Because, again, in the case of one of my buildings, what they did was, no, they didn't immediately approach people about leaving, but they were desirous of renovating if they could, but if they could not do that without evicting the current residents, they were quite okay with letting the building's maintenance deteriorate to the point where L&I had to step in and close the building, evicting over 200 units worth of people. That is a disturbing trend that I am seeing.
Yes, it makes a ton of sense for us to approach state, and I think it's about expanding the pool of funding. Actually, Senator Hughes has been a champion on this with the new housing options program, but we still need more funding, particularly when you're talking about gentrifying areas. But it's not just the money, it's also the flexibility. The rules of these connected to some of these funding sources that could be used to purchase or renovate these properties and get them into good condition are extremely rigid. And it is my opinion that they do not meet the needs that we have on the ground and in community. So I would love to work with you on this with our state partners on a number of fronts.
Look forward to it. It impacts so many people. And the interesting thing, these are working people. They're the working poor often. And They're working 2 or 3 jobs to survive. And so this hits them like a gut punch. And the amount of down payment security that is required to move somewhere else, they're not getting proper assistance from people to relocate. Even when they find themselves at the your compromise you were able to come up with for the university folk is amazing, because some people they don't get car fare to go to their next place of living. So thank you, Madam Chair.
I would say I would
Thank you so
thank you for
much.
the question. I would say also that to applaud Senator Hughes for the Housing Opportunity Grant funds, and then the advocacy to set aside I think it's 40 million out of the 100 million for preservation, and to encourage that kind of expansion of resources going forward.
Yes, we're grateful. I don't mean to downplay it at all. It's a huge win. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee for this panel? There being none, Mr. Goodman, will you please call the next panel to testify?
Yes, our next panelists are Vincent O'Donnell and Andrew Frischkoff.
Vincent, are you there and connected?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. I'm Vincent O'Donnell, and I'll proceed. Thank you very much, Councilwoman Gautier, and thanks for the opportunity to testify on these 2 bills, and really for all of your interest in the critical issue of preserving affordable housing. I want to thank you for focusing attention on the issue of these federal subsidies and use restrictions that are expiring, and I really want to align myself with the previous eloquent statements made by all the council members and Dina Schlossberg and Rachel Garland about the pressing human need, including racial equity aspects of it, underlying the preservation issue. And congratulations on the settlement for UC Townhomes. So I'm Vincent O'Donnell. I'm an affordable housing consultant. I've worked for 50 years with state and local governments, nonprofit developers, and resident organizations. I was formerly National Vice President for Preservation at Local Initiative Support Corporation, LISC, where Andy is now. I currently chair the Affordable Housing Preservation Advisory Committee for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I advise the City of Boston in affordable housing preservation strategy. And I work closely with HUD at local and headquarters leadership level on specific issues related to preservation. My personal primary mission is to promote the creation and preservation of safe, affordable multifamily housing. I testified last year in February and spoke to the overall nature of the affordable housing preservation challenge, stressing the need to maintain an appropriate balance in the public-private partnership that has created this rich inventory of affordable multifamily housing. And in that model, the public sector provides resources, incentives, and safeguards, i.e. regulations. And the private sector creates and sustains the affordability itself. There are real challenges to long-range affordability, including the right to prepay subsidized mortgages, the right to decline renewal of expiring project-based Section 8 contracts, the expiration of long-term use agreements, sometimes physical and financial distress, and sometimes just simply aging and a normal need for modernization and recapitalization. And we have a mature toolkit we've built over the last 35 or 40 years of preservation measures that include a combination of resources, incentives, and regulatory actions in keeping with the essence of that public-private partnership that created the portfolio. But much of this toolkit consists of voluntary actions. In the face of mounting losses in the irreplaceable inventory, many jurisdictions have sought ways to increase the likelihood that owners or purchasers of these properties will choose preservation, which is what we're here today for. I want to speak today to the viability and the enforceability and the consequences of various previously enacted statutes and ordinance that are similar to bills 221, 017, and 018. These 2 bills taken together, use notice requirements, notice requirements, data analysis, and purchase rights that respect an owner's right to realize the market value of the asset they have created and sustained. I think Dina put and Rachel put it eloquently about how these three pieces really form a unit, the way they work together. And they are key to any successful preservation strategy. It takes lead time to propose a viable alternative to a pending exit, and notice requirements address that issue. If a fair and timely opportunity to purchase is provided to true preservation entities, a future preservation crisis can be averted. And finally, without good data and analysis, it's really hard to make the case for and obtain public resources to support preservation transactions and make owners whole in terms of obtaining value for their asset. So before going further, I just want to say I support both of these bills, both based on the growing critical need to increase and not reduce the supply of deeply affordable housing, and on the reasonableness and effectiveness of these measures. I won't go through the detailed description of the legislation because that's been done and you're all familiar with it. But I do want to say, in my work at LISC, I was there almost 15 years. I saw across the country a growing awareness in various jurisdictions that active measures such as these were needed. A preservation transaction needs resources, but it became clear that in order to accomplish anything, there's also a need for procedural and economic incentives. I'll just say in Massachusetts, after some significant losses and high-profile losses to the affordable housing inventory, such as the kind that you've described here, 12 years ago, we enacted Mass General Laws Chapter 40T. This legislation provides an orderly framework. I think of it as sort of a process choreography with a message that it's a fair process. It imposes transaction requirements in the public interest, but also establishes what I call an easy door for preservation. That legislation and its implementing regulations have been fully accepted by the real estate community, and they've been incorporated into normal affordable housing transaction structure. In addition to the formal requirements, or maybe actually because they exist, it's also provided a framework for negotiating preservation outcomes in an orderly way. And for this approach to work best, we also need preservation resources and short-term acquisition financing to optimize the opportunities created by the legislation. If we're asking people to take the time to give notice and to take the time for a response by a preservation purchaser to use an opportunity like a right of first refusal or a right of first offer, then it's going to be good if we can offer the ability to close quickly once we've gone through all that. And we do have resources for that. Organizations like LISC, for example, have resources. I'm not picking your pocket, Andy, but there are resources such as pre-development lending and short-term acquisition loans. And LISC is an organization that has taken the time over the years to understand this issue, and they know how to underwrite that kind of resource. So it's a really valuable thing. 2 years ago, an organization in Massachusetts called the Community Economic Development Assistance Corporation, or CEDAC, is a state quasi-public agency. They published a report called Chapter 40T at 10. If you don't already have it, I will send a copy of it. And besides describing that legislation and its outcomes in Massachusetts, it does a survey of other jurisdictions' similar laws. And so that question has come up. So I will offer that as something which will kind of go into a little bit more detail than I can do just in this testimony today about other jurisdictions. And as we heard earlier, there are basically three kinds of things here: notice laws, various definitions of rights of purchase, and information and data. And so there are things at the state level: California, Connecticut, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Oregon, Rhode Island, Texas. And at the local level, Denver, San Francisco, and Santa Cruz all have some kind of, I left out Massachusetts, all have some kind of notice requirement. And in terms of right of first refusal or a right to purchase or a right of first offer, There are many such systems there as well. California, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Oregon, and Portland in particular, Rhode Island, Denver, Sacramento, San Francisco, Santa Cruz. All these have various expressions of these rights. And actually, in only one of them that I know of, New York City, was overturned in state court legislation based on what I really think are questionable interpretations of preemption doctrine. I really think that, I think as Dina was saying, the real estate community, if these things are enacted in a fair way and implemented in a fair way, we have found that the real estate community just works with it. And most of the folks who have developed this housing did it because they believe in affordable housing. They may have other things going on in their trajectory right now where they don't want to be the owners anymore. But the opportunity to create a preservation solution is important to many of these owners. So just to summarize, I mean, there is a healthy variety of state and local approaches to supplement the combination of continuing federal resources but expiring mandates. These approaches have the same principles as each other: notice, purchase rights, data analysis. And I want to stress, I haven't said much about data analysis, but it's really important. We started doing that in the Boston area back in 1972. And it really was illuminating how much you can see coming at you, and understanding the resource pipeline that's going to be necessary to match that. But these three approaches are really mainstream. They're not radical. And many jurisdictions that have historically not perceived the need for this legislation because maybe they were in weak multifamily markets and they didn't see a lot of pressure for conversion. Well, that's changing everywhere. And the risk of market conversion is high, and it's everywhere. And it's just important to be able to anticipate that, prevent losses before they irrevocably occur. And this proposed legislation will assist the city in creating an orderly response to a growing challenge.
Thank you so much for your testimony and for your work. Andrew Frischkopf, can you state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Thank you. Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Frischkopf. I'm the Executive Director of Philadelphia Local Initiative Support Corporation, also known as LISC. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I would like to present testimony on behalf of the Preservation Network, of which LISC is the convener, regarding Bill number 221017 and technical changes to Chapter 7200 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Preservation of Affordable Housing. I would like to thank Councilmember Gaudier for her leadership in introducing this bill, and to all of the City Council members on the committee for your commitment to preserving affordable housing in the City of Philadelphia. I would also like to thank the members of the Preservation Network, including Dina and Rachel, who've taken the time to review this bill and to agree on the following testimony on behalf of the Preservation Network. The Preservation Network is a multi-sector collaborative of private, nonprofit, and public sector agencies committed to preserving and protecting at-risk publicly assisted affordable rental housing in Philadelphia. LISC is a leading national and local community development financial institution and intermediary, and we serve as the convener of the Preservation Network. These are precarious times for lower-income households. Systemic inequities that existed prior to the pandemic have become more evident as Philadelphia moves towards economic recovery. Lack of affordable housing and job loss within the lower wage sectors has disproportionately impacted women, and especially Black women, making the need for affordable housing development and preservation for them especially acute. 3 data points, some of which you've heard, I think, previously. In 2022, nearly 49% of Philadelphia renters spent 30% or more of their income on rent. Between 2008 and 2016, the city lost more than 13,000 units that rented for $800 or less, and an estimated 19,500 units of affordable housing may be at risk of loss in the next 20 years in the city of Philadelphia. As most of you are aware, safe, quality, affordable housing creates opportunities for stable employment, serves as the foundation to educational advancement and continuity of healthcare provision. With the disappearance of naturally occurring affordable housing, preservation of publicly assisted housing becomes increasingly crucial. Publicly assisted affordable rental housing uses federal subsidies such as the Section 8 project-based program and the low-income housing tax credit program to support construction and affordable rents for seniors, people with disabilities, and other people with lower and moderate incomes. Unfortunately, public assisted housing is also at risk due to expiring subsidy contracts and affordability requirements. Data from the National Housing Preservation Database suggests by 2035, as many as 10,000 units in Philadelphia may be at risk, and every city council district may have at least 100 units at risk. This is especially sobering when we consider the publicly assisted properties that have been lost, some of which have already been cited in previous testimony. For example, in 2016, nearly 220 lower-income seniors were displaced when the building owner of Overmont House converted the property to student housing. That property had been subsidized through federal housing finance funding and provided Section 8 subsidies to seniors for 40 years. In 2021, as everyone knows, the owner of University City Townhomes in Council District 3 provided an opt-out notice on its HUD Section 8 contract after almost 40 years. It is worth noting that the owner of UCT affirmatively sought approval from HUD to assign existing project-based Section 8 funding to other affordable housing properties in West Philadelphia. This provision, known as HUD 8BB, is an important mechanism for preserving scarce project-based rental subsidies within a city, if not in a particular building. Current regulatory controls are important and useful, but they are insufficient to address our affordable rental housing crisis. Philadelphia lacks nearly 72,000 affordable units for very low and lower income households. With this reality, many UCT residents will struggle and have struggled to find nearby housing and will be displaced to other parts of the city, losing ties to a neighborhood that has been home for decades, a neighborhood that is rich in amenities with access to employment, education, transportation, and healthcare. It is important to add, University City Townhomes provides homes for families, which consist of 2- and 3-bedroom apartments. These are particularly scarce and increasingly scarcer in the city, and the loss of these units underscores a deeper crisis for Philadelphia's families, and particularly women of color with children. For Bill number 221017, it is vital that it will address two critical issues not addressed through a HUD 8BB transfer. The legislation seeks to preserve HUD Section 8 contracts and other forms of affordability at their original locations, and to reduce instances of displacement for residents from their homes. Foundation for the Future is the companion to the city's Housing Action Plan. It includes core recommendations and strategies to address at-risk properties and preserve essential affordable rental housing in the city. The 4 strategies that the Preservation Network seeks to advance through its collaborative work model. 1, to improve available and actionable data about publicly assisted affordable rental properties. 2, strengthen the capacity of residents, owners, and others to repair, recapitalize, and manage properties for long-term affordability. 3, develop new financing options and revenue streams to preserve at-risk properties. And 4, to enact new laws and regulations to support long-term preservation of affordable rental housing. Bill 221017 falls within this 4th strategy. The goal of this bill is twofold: right of first refusal, opportunity for a qualified nonprofit developer, government agency, and/or tenant association to purchase the property and commit to keeping it affordable. And 2, an expanded right of notice to ensure that the tenants of the affordable housing property, as well as legal nonprofits that can provide assistance to tenants, will be notified of the end of affordability periods and subsidy contracts. This process will create an opportunity for developers and building owners to engage in an open and transparent process for preserving affordable housing. Under the proposed timeline, the owner provides 130 days notice to the city, tenants, and legal nonprofit organizations of their intent to sell the property and must provide the material terms of any bona fide offer they receive, which they intend to accept. Eligible entities have 60 days to submit an agreement of sale to the owner that matches the bona fide offer in all material respects. And a matched offer of sale made by a tenant or tenant organization will have priority over other offers made by eligible parties. While the ultimate success of this bill depends also on sufficient funding sources for acquisition and operations of properties, as well as capacity building support for eligible organizations, this bill presents a powerful tool to preserve Philadelphia's at-risk affordable rental housing. In tandem with the other three preservation strategies and Foundation for the Future, this bill will further Philadelphia's prosperity by helping residents stay in their homes and neighborhoods while they seek further economic opportunities. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide this testimony today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Frischkopf, for your testimony, but also for and being together. You all were a huge piece of us being able to prepare and put this legislation forward, and we thank you. Thank you as well, Mr. O'Donnell, for your continued willingness to lend your expertise on this issue. I have one question for you. In your experience, what have the perceived worries or challenges been about this type of legislation, and have any of those suspicions actually played out in reality?
Sure. I mean, when you consider something like this, people will express their concerns. So it's a real thing. But I think the types of concerns I think they're kind of addressed in the legislation. One of them is the time it takes. It certainly, I think the notice requirements are not significant in that way, because it's already mandated in federal law to give a 1-year notice of a Section 8 opt-out, for example. And they're easily planned around. But some owners will claim that it takes longer to go through a right of first refusal process or a right of first offer process, and it adds calendar days to the process. As a practical matter, that has not risen to the level of something which is making it unacceptable. It is a regulatory layer that is added, but frankly, I think in transactions to properties, especially these ones that are at larger scale, I mean, it really takes a long time to even with this sort of an efficient market mechanism to, at the end of the day, how long does it really take to close? Quite a long time. And that's why I also stressed the need and the availability of resources for these purchasers so that they can move expeditiously through the due diligence process and also then close quickly. And we're seeing a growing need for short-term acquisition financing. I advise nonprofit developers in my practice, and I'm seeing most preservation transactions these days really consist of a short-term acquisition loan, recognizing the need that it takes maybe several years to locate, say, a tax credit, a low-income housing tax credit allocation, and other public resources. And so all these transactions take time. And so I think we're not really out of the mainstream in doing that. I think that's probably the biggest thing. I surveyed some affordable housing industry leaders in Massachusetts around some proposed general tenant opportunity to purchase, something replicating the Washington, D.C. TOPA legislation, and was asking people, how did they see this? Another thing that was mentioned was that it would be really important to have if there were a dedicated funding stream. Well, we have that in a sense already for these properties because they're eligible for example, Section 8 mark-to-market and for the same resources that we have for other affordable housing developments. I think none of the concerns I've heard have been insuperable. They're not like red lines, drop dead kind of concerns. I did mention earlier about preemption. Can I just add one thing? Yeah.
Absolutely.
There have been concerns about preemption that were valid when the federal government passed what's called the LIPRA statute, which preserved former Section 236 properties. There was a very prescriptive mechanism for how those properties' future was going to be determined. It was all under federal rules. And there was a specific statutory explicit preemption clause that said local laws could not interfere with the LIPRA process unless they were of general applicability. And there were several attempts at some local or state statutes that failed because they specifically conflicted with that very clear language. But other than the New York case that I mentioned, Local Law 79, I haven't seen any kind of other more subtle things like implied preemption interfere with the function of these statutes.
Thank you. Mr. Frischhoff, did you want to add anything?
I just wanted to echo a couple of things that Vincent shared, and then also to point out that I think the value of the accompanying bill 018 in terms of creating increased information, because on the one hand, 017 sort of creates a requirement for owners, and as Vincent shared, putting deals together takes often years, and having only 130 days, sort of notice doesn't give, even a sophisticated buyer a lot of time to necessarily put things together. But if tenants and elected officials and others are aware that a property may be within a couple of years of its contract expiration, there can be proactive conversations. Tenants can be forewarned and forearmed, just even the possibility to have a voluntary conversation with building owners and management, as well as with public officials, just to say, is there anything for us to be concerned about? And if so, are there opportunities for us to preserve? And I certainly don't want to alarm residents unnecessarily for any reason. And, in many cases, their owners are not going to look to sell or convert. But I think having that information available so that there can be an even greater runway for conversations, I just want to sort of highlight that in addition. So that
I can't stress.
I can't agree with you more. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, we use that a lot here in Boston. The city of Boston has a monthly meeting, and that's agenda is determined by that pipeline, which comes from that data, and it's just so important.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. Are there additional questions or comments for this panel? There being none, Mr. Goodman, will you please call the next panel to testify?
Yes, we are having some difficulty connecting with one of the panelists, so they might come in and out. But next panelists are Jacques-Jean Tizou, Consuela Astillero, and Ms. Wanda Levan.
Okay. Jack, please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jacques-Jean Tizou, I go by JJ for short. I'm an artist and massage therapist and block captain in West Philadelphia. I live on the 4500 block of Osage in West Philly. I have walked around this entire city 11 times, so I have an idea of how complicated it is and how vast. On my block, I have seen up close the trauma that impacts neighbors and communities when affordable housing is lost. In 2019, a 16-unit building on our block was put up for sale when there were no longer funding options to continue preserving it. The tenants got no notice. The community got no notice. We saw people with cameras and clipboards starting to float around, and we knew something was up. And then the tenants got letters saying 2 months to get it. I can't speak to the intricacies of funding and legalisms, but I can speak to the importance of affordable housing in resource-rich neighborhoods, of affordable housing in general, and I can speak a little bit to the trauma that impacted people. I can't speak for my neighbors and tenants, the tenants of that building, but I can tell you, as someone who knew all of them, that they are our more vulnerable neighbors, the ones who maybe can't be on this call because some of them don't have the same phone number. Some of them we're no longer in touch with. In one fell swoop, 95% of the people of color and 100% of the lowest income neighbors on our block got the boot. Some were new neighbors, like Nini and her 3 little daughters, who had just been welcomed maybe 5 or 6 months earlier to University City, a resource-rich neighborhood with ample parks and groceries and transit options and well-funded schools that her kids could go to. And she wasn't given a heads up that all of a sudden, within less than a year, she would get 2 months notice to be out. We have no idea where she is anymore. Other neighbors had been there longer, like our beloved neighbor, Mr. Cyrus. He was 81 years old. He'd lived in that building for 50 years, since before it became taken over as affordable housing. He was displaced from his home of 50 years. On his moving day, he fell and broke his hip as part of the comprehensive relocation assistance that didn't even, with some crappy ass movers, pardon my language, that didn't even put bookcases up against his walls and left tripping hazards that an 81-year-old elder, he fell, he broke his hip, and within 2 months, his life had come to a close. And he could still be having tea on my porch right now. I think of neighbors like Kevin, who's also deceased. I went and visited him once in North Philly, where he was staying with his sister. But he was up a couple flights of stairs, which for someone with very reduced mobility for him meant he basically laid in bed all day, whereas he had more access to neighbors and community on our block. There are a couple neighbors who've moved just a couple blocks away, and they still come back to block parties and community events. But we all wonder, there's this looming cloud of, oh, well, the next building that they're in, when does that get sold? There's another building around the corner managed by the same organization at 45th and Larchwood. And we also wonder, we don't have a way to know, when is that all of a sudden going to disappear? So I think the directory, the notice to tenants, to organizations, to civic groups feels super important to see something like this coming, as Andrew said, and to be able to organize to it ahead of time and preserve the affordability and give people time to plan and react if something like this is coming their way. Half the neighbors from that building we were in touch with and now have lost touch with because, again, vulnerable populations, harder to keep track of, and have many other things on their plate. One of them who may be able to join us to testify today is currently in the hospital. She still wants to speak to you from the ER at Presby because she thinks this is an important issue. Others who I spoke to last week who wanted to speak to you today the phone is disconnected and not working, and that's the challenges of our most marginalized neighbors, to all of a sudden have the rug pulled out from you for all of a sudden the neighborhood that you've lived in. I didn't even tell you about Mary and Talana. Mary and her daughter Talana lived in the neighborhood in the building for 12 years, and her daughter grew up there. It's the neighborhood she knew from middle school, high school to young adulthood, and all of a sudden, she was given 2 months notice. Seeing an elder who could still be alive right now is heartbreaking. Seeing people just go MIA, and seeing what does this do to our city when the most vulnerable neighbors who could most benefit from resource-rich neighborhoods, as resources are flowing to these neighborhoods, for them to then be punted further away. So I'm getting some texts, from our friend Wanda, who wants to speak to y'all, but she may not be able to get in via the team system, so I can actually put her on speakerphone if you'd like and try to give her a call. So I will maybe stop my rambling, but is it okay if we cut straight to Miss Levan? Because I seem to have her texting with me right now, so I can get her on the line if you like. Or does anyone have any questions? I'll put her on first. Thanks for your patience. Tech support has been... Hi, Wanda. I've got you on the phone with our Councilwoman Jamie Gauthier, who you walked with in Cobb's Creek, along with many other members of City Council listening, and they'd love to hear a little. Okay, if you could introduce yourself first for the record.
Hi, my name is Wanda Levan, and I'm a resident of Columbus Property Management. My address, I kind of forgot it because I have a lot of ailments going on, but I was living there and they just, up and had us move out of affordable housing, and most of us don't have money to, move, and we had friends around there and everything. It was a nice neighborhood. Now, where I live at, I don't have nobody to really, like JJ was one of my old neighbors, and it's just worse for me where I'm at, and I don't have a lot of options. So, and then I have a friend that I don't even know where she's at with her kids because they just up and just made us move so quickly, So, I just, I didn't, appreciate that because, you acquire friends and people that check on you and things like that when you have a lot of medical conditions. And if you don't have family, and JJ was like that with most of us, and now we don't have that. I'm in one of their buildings now, and it's basically the same thing. I don't know if they're going to take it away or not. So, and I can't work right now because I have all these ailments that's stopping me from working. I'm at the hospital as we speak, so I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wanda. I appreciate you testifying.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wanda. I think we have one more panelist, and maybe we'll keep you on the line in case there's questions after the other panelist. Is that the right thing?
Okay, I just don't talk to you guys too long about stuff because I know y'all don't have a lot of time.
Is there anything else that you want to share about the circumstance real quick, or shall we get to our next?
Yes, well, it is because, like now, like money and everything be stolen from us. Like now, and I'm going through a situation, and I'm a good tenant. Like I would have loved to just stay where I was at, but it's like I said, no affordable housing. Really, they taking all the affordable housing, and on top of that, they stealing money from the tenants, mental health tenants. So that's what I'm going through now. And I have lupus and all this, and there's a lot of everybody in my building is even mental health or they bedridden. So, they don't have the help, I have my case manager and stuff helping me out. But, right now as we speak, I'm going through it again. The same exact thing where I have to, they threatening me to leave because they did me wrong.
I'm sorry, Wanda. We have to hear from one more panelist, but I'm going to keep you on the line in case we have questions for you from the council afterwards, okay?
Thank you so much. I wanted to offer to follow up with Ms. Wanda, maybe with how to connect to our Right to Counsel program. to see if that may be helpful in getting through some of the issues in her current housing situation. And I also want to thank her so much for testifying and sharing her story, even as she goes through what sounds like a significant health challenge. And I'm just so sorry. And I want to thank you, JJ, for your advocacy on this for many years, and for your kindness to our neighbors. I remember you reaching out to me after I had won the primary in 2019, but before I started in office, and you asked me to sit down on this issue, and you asked for my commitment to this issue. And I just want you to know that I took it to heart, and I still do. And I'm still very committed to this. Thank you. Miss Connie, it's so wonderful to see you. Thank you for being here.
So thank you for having me.
Please state your name. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Consuela Estelero. I am still a resident of University City Townhouses. I moved in on April the 15th, 1983. I was the first resident to move here. I'm a little bit nervous.
Take your time. It's fine.
Yeah. When we were informed on July 8th, 2021, that we had 1 year to leave, it was horrific, because I felt like the government let us down, that you can't, at first I thought that 1 year would be enough time. But then when you think about it, you've been living here for years. And it's not, a year was not enough time. Like, for example, when I applied for one of these homes here, everything, like the manager at that time, they came out and inspected where you were living at that time. Everything was fine as far as my inspection. They had, the manager has said the only thing, we have to do now is to wait for my criminal and my credit background check. Well, I had bad credit, and because of my bad credit, I was denied. But the way God blessed me to be able to have one of these houses was because a good friend of my family, who was friends with one of the owners, I guess, as you say, like, pushed me through. Okay. And although the manager was like, he was bothered and, disturbed about, me not being able to move in there, he couldn't, break the law or the rules. So if I didn't have a good friend that knew one of the owners and pushed me through, then I would have never been able to be in here. And at this time, I still have bad credit. And, you know, a lot of places, you know, let you know from the door, like they're not accepting, even with a voucher, you know, anyone with bad credit. So that's been an issue. I'm still here. And, you know, it felt like, you know, you just get kicked out of your home, you know. You know, we're not renewing, you know, the Section 8, whatever. And it's like, we're human beings. And how can you do a human being like that? You have children and, you know, different things. Now, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. I have a blueprint, a picture of a blueprint that was designed in 2012 about, you know, this blueprint showed what they had planned on building here. That was 2012. So, you know, a person has a right to, the owner has a right to sell, you know, their property and all. But if they knew that this is what their intentions were in 2012, how come we weren't told until 2021? I believe that and it should be mandatory for all Section 8 owners for them to have, like, say a contract, say if it's like 20 years at a time. So, and if, you know, before, you know, it's even, you know, finalized for, you know, this owner to, you know, have a Section 8 complex. In other words, I might, you know, not be making it very clear, but okay, say if you're a landlord and, you know, the law is in effect that is 20 years, okay, 20 years, like, at a time, the landlord should have to give at least 3 to 5 years notice so people won't just be, like, given, you know, such a short notice and made to move out. That would at least be considerate to you know, all the residents, and give them some time to get their credit together, or, make, make things that need to be in order. You know, that I think that would be, you know, a good amount of time. Like, that owner might, after 20 years, might want to continue, but an owner should know 3 to 5 years, you know, before that 20-year deadline, whether or not he's going to sell. And at the beginning, I was so devastated, stressed, angry, felt violated. And then I got on my knees and asked God to give me guidance. and direction, and all those that were supporting us, and with the residents, and a lot of people from the outside that were extending their help. I said the only way that this is going to be meaningful is if we have God's power, and trust to guide us. This also was an opportunity for us to teach our children to not just accept, things that are not morally right, or, there can be change. And if we just laid back and, just let it happen, whatever, and moved on, it was just going to happen again and again. Ms. Gutierrez, you started it, and God started with you. And I look at this as not one person, not 10 people, not 1,000 people's doing. It's everybody. And God worked through everybody to come to where we are at now. This is supposed to be the city of brotherly love. That's not brotherly love. That's not, what humans should have to, be subjected to. One nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. That's a whole contradiction. No one should be just moved around like a piece of furniture. And it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And I believe that it should be more the government and those that are all a part of the government fighting for us. I believe that certain things they shouldn't allow. Okay, I mean, we're talking about people and their families, their children. And it had me sick. Many nights I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned. I was bitter. I was hurt. I felt violated, disrespected. It's just something that people can do and go home and go to sleep. This was the Lord's victory. I'm still, devastated and different things, but not like before. It was just, the outcome of this situation was powerful. And it doesn't happen all the time, but this is the beginning of change. It's the beginning of change, because most people thought that, the outcome wouldn't, like be what it is. We were blessed. We were blessed. And I mean, just look at it. This is the beginning of like some serious change. I just, I thank everyone who's had a part in, supporting us and helping us. It's to so many people, pretty much everybody, like they're not like believing what the outcome was. So, Miss Jamie, just look at it for what it is. I know you were, you were fighting and like doing all you can, okay? But you have limitations too. And, this is major for, everyone at University City Townhouses. And it's extremely major for you. Okay. Things like this don't just happen. You was fair and professional and tried to, come to with you and negotiating. You tried your best, to keep it professional, polite. But then when you see that was not going two ways, then you did what you had to do for us. And
Miss Connie, I thank you so much. I do think I'm going to have to wrap up.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize for taking so much time, but
No. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. You were the first person that my staff and I met when we came down to the townhomes in 2020, and you've been a consistent source of inspiration. We are so grateful for you. And thank you for giving us what we needed in terms of inspiration to keep going with this. And thank you for being here today, because I know it's also painful to, relive and to talk about such a traumatic experience. And I want to say the same to Ms. Wanda and JJ. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your stories. We appreciate you.
And we appreciate you also.
Have a good afternoon. Are there any other questions or comments for this panel from members of the committee? There being none, Mr. Goodman, will you please call the next panel to testify?
Yes, our final panelist is Melissa Long.
Okay. Great. Melissa Long, can you please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony? Thank you for being here today.
Yes. Good afternoon, Chairperson Gautier and other members of the committee. I'm Melissa Long, the Director for the Division of Housing and Community Development, and I'm pleased to provide testimony on behalf of the administration in support of both bills number 22-1017 and 22-1018. Thank you, Council Member, again for the opportunity to work with you, your staff, and other members of the Preservation Network on amendments to this bill. We especially appreciate you working with us and the administration to remove language from Section 72025
that would have required the city to verify the qualifications of potential buyers. As I have provided in previous testimony before City Council, the city, like you and other members of this committee, are deeply committed to preserving existing affordable rental housing units. Through our last two preservation requests for proposals, the city committed nearly $40 million to preserve 540 affordable rental housing units. And, you know, in addition to providing very critical development resources to make improvements to existing preservation, we also work with PACDC and LISC, if Andy's still on the phone, on building capacity for our nonprofit developers to help preserve. You know, while we're incredibly supportive of Bill 221017, I do want to note and echo the others' testimony that the city can't do this alone. We do not have enough resources to supply all potential buyers with funding to acquire these affordable rental housing developments, and we look forward, you know, and welcome the opportunity to work with the state. And we also continue, I think I've testified before too, the importance of operating subsidies and advocate at the national level for housing choice vouchers and also flexible money for rental assistance. I, like others too, the importance of both of these bills together. You know, we thank you for the opportunity to work on 221018, and I want to give a huge shout out for City Council technical staff. We're creating a database of multifamily housing project, right? And we, my staff, DHCD staff, and have been working with council staff on creating a public-facing form of this database, and we'll continue to work adding the additional fields and so forth, you know, provided that that information is available. And, you know, we have met with LISC and the Preservation Network, and we've been meeting internally because it is very critical to have this resource so that we can plan and be ready and be aware of expiring preservation, multifamily rental projects. So thank you for this opportunity to present testimony on both bills. I can't thank you enough. It's a really great process when we're working together, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Long. I want to echo the shout out to Council Tech Support. They've been invaluable, particularly on Bill 018. And I want to thank you and your team as well. And yes, we realize that everything that you're saying about more funding is true. I feel enthused about the way that funding has been going in this space with both local and state options that have opened up just in the past few years. And you have certainly my full commitment and I'm sure the commitment of this committee and the full council that will work to develop even more sources of funding for this critical need. I don't have any questions. Are there additional questions or comments for this panel from members of the committee? Thank you so much. That concludes panel testimony for these bills. Mr. Goodman, do we have anyone registered to provide public comment?
Yes, we do. So council support, do we need a couple minutes, or are we good to jump straight in?
We could call them in now.
Perfect.
Okay, we'll now take a brief break to connect those individuals who have registered to provide public comment to this hearing.
Hello, this is Andre. Hello?
Great, that was quick. Thank you. So, yep. First person registered for public comment is Andre Del Valle.
Good afternoon, Mr. Del Valle. Please state your name and proceed with your comment. Mr. Del Valle, are you still there?
Looks like Mr. Del Valle got disconnected. We're going to try connecting him once more.
Okay.
Hello, this is Andre.
Hi, Mr. Del Valle. Can you please state your name and proceed with your comment?
Sure. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Gaultier and members of the Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless. My name is Andre Del Valle. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania Apartment Association, representing just under 285,000 units and 300 property management companies across the Commonwealth. Locally here in Philadelphia, we represent over 38,000 units and 49 property management companies. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to testify today on bill number 221017. The Pennsylvania Apartment Association truly believes in the spirit of cross-collaboration, especially when it comes to legislation impacting the multifamily housing industry. Locally, we have worked closely with PHDC, assisting in emergency rental assistance rollouts, hosting briefings for both housing providers and residents, while also troubleshooting challenges with some of our new city programs. We cross-collaborated with Councilmember Brooks and Community Legal Services on the newly implemented Renters Access Act, and with former Councilmember Gim on the Eviction Diversion Program. Just a few weeks ago, I met with members of our Pennsylvania congressional delegation and our U.S. senators in Washington, D.C., advocating for the Choice and Affordable Housing Act, which seeks to revitalize the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's HUD Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. I highlight this cross-collaboration because legislation like the one before you today desperately needs to have an open dialogue among all stakeholders and its elected officials. The legislation before you today in Bill 221017 has a number of technical amendments that are needed, as well as ambiguous definitions, which requires the owner of affordable housing properties to provide each of the following at least 12 months written notice of their intent to take protected action in the city. Outside of this notice, there's also a right of first refusal, which seems to be incredibly overreaching, as it requires an owner of affordable housing who receives a bona fide offer that the owner intends to accept from an entity other than an eligible party, a tenant, or a tenant organization. The owner would then have to accept any matched agreements of sale, alike in all material respects, in the offer received. This creates a minimum of 130-day process, which we believe would disincentivize some of these housing providers to want to continue in the Section 8 program. While we appreciate the cross-collaboration with PHDC and Community Legal Services, we don't believe that either party has the financial resources to purchase an affordable housing here in the city of Philadelphia, simply adding red tape to a program that continues to disincentivize housing providers from wanting to participate in the program. The apartment demand is growing and the industry needs to keep up. However, producing new apartments to meet this demand requires new development approaches, more incentives, and fewer restrictions, as Philadelphia needs to build 3,000 new apartments each year just to meet the demand. While we understand the intent of the legislation, the requirements are ambiguous. The requirements and ambiguous definitions will surely lead to more confusion and delays in the sale of private property. The Pennsylvania Apartment Association has and will continue to stress the need for private-public partnerships and cross-collaborating to address the challenges our city faces. We welcome an opportunity to bring all stakeholders together to sit and discuss viable options while not punishing an owner for wanting to sell their property or reducing our affordable housing stock by disincentivizing housing providers with the requirements in Bill 221017. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify today and look forward to working with this committee and council members in the future on any legislation impacting the multifamily housing industry.
Thank you so much, Mr. Del Valle, for being here and for your comment. I wanted to offer a response to some of the things that you offered. First, we did engage property owners through the creation of this bill. We also did make significant amendments to the bill post-introduction that I think clear up some of the ambiguity that you're referencing. And beyond that, I'd like to offer a couple of other responses to the things that you said. First, the claim of the bill being an overreach is not true. These steps are established practice in municipalities large and small, as we heard through the testimony from Regional Housing as well as from Vince O'Donnell. We've consulted with many legal teams on this, as well as our own law department, and everybody agrees that there haven't been many challenges. I think there was only one challenge to this type of legislation mentioned today due to a misunderstanding of the preemption laws around this issue. Next, I want to clarify that the time period to allow for a possible match is not 130 days, it's 60 to 90 days, which is not only in line with other cities like ours, it's well within the standard due diligence period that would be a part of a large property transaction. So we are not considering that to be disruptive. Once it's adopted and becomes common practice, as we heard, it will become second nature to those in the real estate community. And we do not believe that you will see any significant drop-offs or delays in how these deals are processed. And any entity with enough capacity to implement a government affordable housing contract will also be able to implement the minimal notification requirements in the bill. But thank you very much for calling in to comment. Are there any other public commenters today, Mr. Gitman?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. There being no further questions from members of the committee and no other witnesses to testify, I will ask if there is anyone else present in this hearing whose name we have failed to call and that wishes to offer testimony on the bills being considered today. Oh, Councilman Vice Chair Jones, do you have a question or comment? You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. From the perspective of the Apartment Owners Association, could they put in writing what they're, like, what is ambiguous about this that they would like some clarity on?
I think they sent around something earlier, but I didn't get it till 12:30.
All right, well, I'll look at it as well. There is a delicate balance, but there has to be protections, but it does not have to be onerous. And so we'll take a look at it, and I'm going to vote this out and vote in favor of it. But we have time for final passage to make amendments if they are necessary. So.
Okay, thank you. There being no further questions from members of the committee and no other witnesses to testify, I want to thank all the panels and witnesses for their participation today. We value your opinions. I now invite all panels and witnesses to please disconnect before we go into our public meeting. We will now pause the proceedings briefly as multiple participants leave the hearing. Council member, you're off mute.
Yeah, I was whispering to myself. Sorry.
I'm just keeping you covered. If we can get all the witnesses to disconnect now. Thank you. Mr. Goodman, are we okay to proceed?
Yes, I believe so, Madam Chair.
This concludes the public hearing of the committee. We will now go into a public meeting to consider the action to be taken on the bills before this committee today. Mr. Goodman, will you please call the roll to take attendance?
Councilmember Bass. Councilmember Bass. I'll come back. Councilmember Brooks.
Present.
Thank you. Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. Councilmember Driscoll.
Present.
Thank you. Councilmember Squilla. Councilmember Squilla. Vice Chairman Jones.
Madam Chair, I am present.
Thank you. And I'll try once more. Councilmember Bass.
Mr. Chair, this is Mark Squilla, present.
Councilmember Bass, can you hear us? Do we have a quorum?
Yes, you have five committee members present.
Okay, thank you. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jones for a motion on bill number 221017.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I offer amendment to bill number 221017. A copy of that amendment has been circulated to members of the committee, and I move for its adoption.
It has been moved and properly seconded that, oh, wait a second.
Second.
Do we have a, thank you.
This is Councilwoman Bass seconding.
Thank you so much. It has been moved and properly seconded that the amendment to bill number 221017 be adopted. All in favor will indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it and the bill has been amended. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jones for a motion on all of the bills heard today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that bill number 221017 as amended be moved from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to allow next reading at our next session of council.
Second.
It has been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it and the motion carries. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jones for a motion on bill number 221018.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I offer an amendment to bill number 221018. A copy of that amendment has been circulated to all members of council, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
It has been moved and properly seconded that the amendment to that bill number 221018 be reported out of committee. All in favor will indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
The ayes have it, and the bill, the ayes have it. Wait a second. I think I messed that up. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I think I was supposed to do the amendment on this bill first.
So we passed.
Let's do it again.
Yes. All right. Madam Chair, I offer an amendment to bill number 221018. A copy of that amendment has been circulated to all members of council, and I move for the adoption of the amendment.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved and properly seconded that the amendment to bill number 221018 be adopted. All in favor will indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the bill has been amended. Now, I recognize Councilmember Jones for a motion on all of the bills heard today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that bill number 221018, as amended, be moved from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to allow first reading of this bill at our next session of council.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. This concludes the business before the Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless for today. Thank you all very much for your attendance. Thank you for your work and your partnership on this issue, and for all of your support. I really, really appreciate all of you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Have a great day.
Evening. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.